So all of you have just finished or are finishing a module on quantitative research, and you know how important it is for our practice to be able to use the best available treatment. You know it's important to do research studies that involved randomized controlled trials and research questions. But there are times that we need to look at other kinds of questions. So we want to explore a phenomenon, or we want to look at sort of the hows and whys, or just have an understanding. So if I have a person with a hand injury, I might want to know what's the best modality to use with them, or the best exercise. But I also might want to know the experience of what it's like to talk with their boss about accommodations, or changing the work patterns for them. So there are different kinds of studies for different things. So today I'm not going to go into too much about what qualitative research is, because you also have readings in that area. But I'm going to talk about a case example, a study that I did that was qualitative, and how I coded the data. And then you're going to have experience coding some of my data to practice it. And this is in preparation for your assignment where you'll be coding data. Okay? Any questions? Don't let the microphones intimidate you. Okay, good.
Where's the PowerPoint?
Where is the PowerPoint? I uploaded it for my class. Have you guys uploaded it yet? It should be, I think in mine it's under modules.
It's on week 12. It's called Qualitative Coding. Thank you.
Week 12, qualitative coding. Okay. So this is what I'm going to talk about, the coding, how we develop codes and categories and eventually find themes in the research that we're doing. So this is just a brief review of different kinds of research. We have the quantitative research, where we assume that things are measurable, that they're stable, there is some governing law that we can use to make the outcomes can be predictable. So the focus really is to predict and explain and to seek causal relationships. Now, we're not often able to look at causality in qualitative research. We think of reality as being socially constructed. So to my example of a hand injury, someone with, say, a repetitive motion disorder, carpal tunnel syndrome, one person may experience that very differently than another person. So there are multiple realities that we may have to consider. And the focus in the qualitative research then is to just understand the experience and the meaning of that for them. Another assumption is that the researcher who's doing qualitative research brings their own biases and their own reality to it. So you have to be reflexive when you're looking at the data about how you feel about what's happening and what's going on in your experiment. And bracket some of those feelings if you can as you're analyzing the data in most kinds of qualitative research. And I should say there's also participatory qualitative research where the researcher is actually part of what's going on. So not so much bracketing and that kind. Now, to talk more about qualitative research, if you're looking at social inquiry or social reality, some of the words that you might use are to understand, describe, interpret, explore, and it can be done with individuals, with groups, at a cultural level. Some of the key features, when I did my research, I didn't have a theoretical framework for it per se. I was exploring several different frameworks that might possibly be used to explain data as it emerged. So I didn't have one theoretical framework, but I did choose several that I thought might explain how people develop as professionals, which was the topic of my research. You try to immerse yourself in the setting as you're collecting the data. So In my case, what I did was interview people. I collected CVs from them. I had already talked with people that they worked with who had recommended them. So getting information from a variety of different sources. Sort of the insider's view. And then when you start analyzing the data, what you want is what's called a thick description. You want to use the participants' own words to justify what kinds of results or what kinds of themes are emerging from the data. So in my case, the purpose of my study was to explore personal values and external factors that influence the development of professional exemplars. And at the time that I did this study, I was the manager of professional development for OTs, PTs, speech pathologists, and respiratory therapists, quite a range. And so I was responsible for professional development, and I noticed wide variation in people who, how engaged they were in the workplace and in their profession. So I wanted to look at this from a very positive approach. I went in terms of appreciating people who were exemplars. I didn't want to study, well, why don't you belong to your professional organization? Why don't you attend continuing education? I wanted to look at the people who were experts in their field and exemplars and figure out what was special about those people who were considered to be at the top of their field. So I was working in an acute hospital setting, so that was my population: nurses, physical therapists, and occupational therapists who were working in the acute hospital setting. And I used people who were working in hospitals from Northern California, and they had to be recommended by their peers or their managers as people who were exemplary. And I had other qualifications for them as well. So you also have to define what you're going to be looking at. So I wanted to define people who were professional and exemplars as people who didn't consider themselves just being a professional, but being a member of a profession and understanding what the responsibilities of being an occupational therapist or a physical therapist or a nurse meant. Because there are accountabilities to us as if we want to be called a professional. So my research question: what are the factors that influence the development of professional role behaviors and exemplars in the acute hospital setting? And I had sub-questions that I looked at. So personal values, social influences, academic factors, workplace factors, and professional organization factors. So I can tell you that when I started my coding of the data from the interviews and the CVs and the other materials that I used, these were going to be some of my coding factors, right? Because those were the sub-questions that I wanted to explore. And then when you're deciding how to do a qualitative research project, there are some, when you're doing quantitative research, you want a tool that's valid and reliable, but those terms don't exactly apply in the qualitative experimental field. So I like this way of looking at your study. So this is from Tracy 2012 Qualitative Inquiry, and they call it the eight big tent criteria. Is it a worthy topic? Well, it was worthy to me. I don't know how other people feel about it, but I thought from what I was doing in the literature I was reading that it was a worthy topic, and it earned me my PhD, so it feels like it's still worthy. What kind of rigor did I use? Did I follow all of the steps for qualitative research that I should have in terms of collecting and analyzing the data? Was I reflexive? Did I think about my own biases as I'm doing this? Was my data credible? And actually my dissertation advisor told me, you're putting a lot of quotes in there. And I said, but I feel like I need to have a lot of data to demonstrate, a lot of quotes to demonstrate that I've got a thick description of the themes that I'm finding. And then this is an important one. How does your research resonate with people who are working in the acute care hospital setting? So what I did with my data after I finished it was had developed some themes. I gave my themes back to the people that I had interviewed, the 12 participants, and said, how does this feel to you? Does this feel like your experience as an exemplar? Or other people that I've talked to about it, does it make sense? Does some of these themes make sense to them, to people who work in the same setting? And then was I ethical, and is it going to make a significant contribution? So what I use, the kind of methodology I used, my PhD was in education, and I used the most common qualitative approach in educational research, which is what's called basic qualitative research. I had IRB approval, used semi-structured interviewing, and I had 12 participants. Now with qualitative research, you may not know in advance how many participants you're going to have, because you want to keep collecting data until some of the information keeps repeating itself over and over. And actually, by the time I had interviewed about 5 people, I was seeing some of the same things over and over. But I wanted to get enough from each discipline to be able to compare. Can I compare nurses to other nurses, and can I compare nurses to occupational therapists to see if the experience is the same? And it was generally the same. Now, these were exemplars in the sense that everybody who was part of the study had to be a member of their professional organization. They had to be active within their professional community. And you can see that a lot of these people had post-professional degrees. They had been preceptors or fieldwork educators for students. They'd taught in their hospital community. Some had served on, had done regional and national presentations, and had been adjunct faculty at universities. So I think I did do a good job of collecting participants who were exemplars in the hospital setting. And these are some of the themes that emerged from the data. The people, one very important word that came from several people was, I don't want to be stagnant. I want to be active. I want to be learning all the time. They were also risk takers in that dynamism. They weren't, they might be told, we're not ready to start that program, and they would be strongly committed to, our patients need this, I'm going to do it anyway. So they would use their own time to do that, or fight to get the time to do projects that they were committed to. They were also very committed to their patients, to the workplaces that they were at. Even some of them described workplaces that were just a little bit less than desirable in some aspects, but they were still very committed to those settings and to their professions. So these are some examples of how you give that thick, rich description of what you say. So here's an example of what PT3 said. I have to say right now I have too many jobs and I'm doing too many things, but I also just don't want to be coming in 9 to 5, clocking out. I don't want to be an employee. I don't want to have a job. I would like to have a profession. So looking at the social factors, again, these were people that had the same things that go on with all of us. They have spouses, kids, relationships ending, relationships starting, but they somehow manage to maintain sort of an upward growth throughout all of these things. So here's an example. I try not to let school interfere. I do it while her children are busy with other activities. So then my daughter's at her violin lesson, and I'm in the car writing a paper. In terms of academic factors, most people remembered that their information about professional development was what they considered, it's the easy A or the easier course, and it wasn't really important, and it wasn't as important as the skills classes. And they remembered talking about professional behaviors in terms of dress, ethics, and being on time, things like that, the right kind of clothes. And you see some quotes. I thought those courses were fluff by one of the RNs. Now, one of the interesting things for the academic factors were that the people who had gone back to school felt like they really understood better than what professionalism was, and that the post-professional education really helped them grow as a professional because they understand more about what's going on, which makes sense. Now, in terms of work influences, and I don't want to give you my whole study, this is an example for you. It didn't seem to matter whether they had supportive managers or whether they had a workplace where it was not so supportive for them, because remember, these are people who are driven internally. Those were their values for learning and lifelong learning. So sometimes they had supportive managers and they worked in an environment where they had a lot of opportunities. But if they had less support, they still managed to grow individually and as a professional. But here's some of the examples, and this is one of the negative examples. So productivity is a priority, writing good notes is a second priority, and patient care becomes a third priority. And then there's the fourth priority, your professional development. She said, where can you get with that? And I interviewed someone else at the same facility who said every staff meeting that they had started with an assessment of everybody's productivity, and it was announced at the staff meeting. And she said, what is the message we're giving our new employees about what's important in the workplace setting? What message are we giving to the students who come here and to the new employees? So you can see, though, that this is a person that recognized that that was an issue and that productivity really wasn't the end-all, be-all, but that maybe patient care should be first in there, that might be the first thing to talk about. So other work influences were the peers, and this was a strong theme throughout. So some people worked with people who didn't care. They're just in and out, didn't do things. And this was an interesting one from a PT. She was nationally recognized for some of the work that she had done. And she said, I find myself in this foreign fringe territory. The fact that I go and speak at a conference, that I'm a consultant, that I was appointed to a national task force, and yet there was sort of a lack, not just even a lack of support, but jealousy, resentment from some of the colleagues. And I heard this from several people, from some of the nurses. I think I have an example here of a nurse who had gotten a master's degree and had advanced above some of the peers with more clinical experience. And I heard this from a nurse who was an evidence-based practice fellow doing a project, and the nurses on that unit were sort of like, well, yeah, she's got this, but what does she know? We know how to save a patient's life. Well, of course she knew also, but she felt that kind of what we call a community, the community of practice did not support people's professional behavior. So community of practice was actually one of the theoretical frameworks I was considering as I looked at development. How do the people around us influence what we do as professionals? So then for professional organizations, what's the purpose of our professional organization? Let me ask you.
Continuing education, advocacy.
Education is the number one answer that I got from even professional exemplars. Yes, but if we're professionals, do we need our professional organization to educate us? Shouldn't the second one, advocacy, or shouldn't our giving to our profession, giving back to our professional organizations, be one of our goals? So you can see where we're not doing a good job of educating people about what the role of the professional is. And these people who were exemplars saw the organization primarily as educational, and only 3 of 12 of them actually participated. So one of the criteria for my study was that everybody had to be a member. Well, they were members, but they paid their dues every year. They were not giving back to their profession. So one of the OTs did say, the professional organization provides the backbone to what we're all trying to do. I think the organization provides structure to our profession. It drives the profession forward and advocates. It keeps us all centered and excited. How many of you went to the OTAC meeting? Was it exciting? Yeah. Being around people who are doing really active things and learning and enjoy what they're doing. So the way I was looking at professional exemplars, and a definition of professional, I like this one by Cruis, 2004. You require specialized knowledge and skills. It takes prolonged education and practice. Sometimes it seems like the education's never going to end, right? As you're going through the second year. The members are autonomous, they're self-regulating. But you also demonstrate a commitment to competence. These exemplars demonstrated that to the public and to their profession. So not quite as much from the profession. So as I thought about my result, so here's another example. I'm proud that I've made a difference in a lot of people's lives. I tell them I'm an OT and I love my job. I love working with people. I love my teammates. I love the hospital environment. I love making a difference for patients. Wouldn't you love to be a patient for that person? I mean, really outstanding. But if I have to think about her as a professional or as an expert practitioner, what I see here from this part of it is that she's an expert practitioner, but is she a professional? And I can't tell from that quote, but it made me wonder for this group of people that I interviewed. They were exemplars in their workplace setting, but I don't know that they were exemplars for being a professional. So maybe I should have looked at my criteria a little bit better and looked for people who were actively giving back to their profession. Because we need a broader understanding of what professionalism is. I mean, people say I'm a professional hairdresser, I'm a professional truck driver, I'm a professional. We use the word professional in a lot of different ways. But that prolonged education, the lifelong learning, the giving back to our public and to our profession, those are things that we need to consider as we're doing this and as we use that word professional. So that was sort of my take home from it, from analyzing all this data. So what I did as I collected the data was I had to take all the information and start coding it. So there were some obvious codes that I used. Were they an OT, a PT, or a nurse? Were they male or female? But there were other categories that I could put them into. And this is a process, it's a cycle. So you look at the data as you start collecting. And after I interviewed the first 3 or 4 people, I realized that maybe there's some other questions that I need to include because I was analyzing and putting things into some tentative categories. I could ask the new questions, see what kind of responses I was getting. So it's an iterative process as you're doing this. And then you have to start organizing all that data. So you start out with the transcript, and you're going to get a chance to do this in a few minutes, where you bracket information that's important, and then you might start to write 1 or 2 code words that tell you what it is. And whenever possible, you're going to use a participant's own words. You're going to come up with a lot of words, but then you have to look for the ones that are synonyms or the ones that best describe what you're doing. So you want to practice what's called lean coding. So as you're doing your homework assignment for this, you want to make sure that you're not getting carried away with how many codes you're using. You don't want too few, but because you want to capture all the different topics, but you don't want to use too many. We're going to do some collapsing of the themes in just a minute. So I use some software to help me. It doesn't take the place of your analysis because you still have to do the bracketing and choose what the computer's going to look like. But it does help for searching for quotes and things like that. Now, I talked about how I checked my themes with the people who participated in my study. I didn't take just my word for the development of the themes. I also had somebody else look at what I did. So I had an OT and actually a psychologist who had done qualitative research go back and read my interviews and look at the themes that I had come up with to see if they felt like I had captured the important aspects of what I was looking at and that I was as unbiased as I could be about the research. So this is what my list in, I used Atlas TI. So I had the obvious ones, PT, OT, RN, I had gender down here, I had some of my theoretical frameworks that I was looking at, self-directed learning, theory of planned behavior, communities of practice. So if things they said supported those theories, then I could use those. But there were other things that I coded, barriers, and it could be a support and coded as a manager, or it could be supported, either a barrier or a support. Manager could be coded with both of those things. So the quotes were tagged with different things. So you initially read through the data, you divide the text into segments, you start to bracket things that you think are important, you label them with some codes, you look to see which codes might be redundant, and then you can collapse them into themes. Now, the exercise you're going to do today and the exercise you're going to do for our homework, or how many of you are doing qualitative studies for your research project? So a few of you. You're probably not going to have enough subjects to collapse things or to come up with themes, because if you're working and only get 2 or 3 clients, and you're limited by the number of people that you get for your study, you haven't looked to make sure that you're starting to get redundancy in the codes that you're finding or the categories that you're finding. So when I'm advising students, if they start writing in their research paper that they've come up with themes and they only have 2 or 3 subjects, and I know that they had trouble getting subjects, I make them rewrite it as into the code area or the category area, more the categorization. All right, so we're going to practice this now. I want everybody to think of how they would describe happiness. Oh, and Megan, could you go over to my computer and just escape from that? And let's go into just that slide. And I want you to change the layout so you can write text in there. Yeah, the slider for making it bigger at the bottom. Does somebody use, do you use Mac? You use PC? Does somebody use a Mac who would be our secretary for us? We'll make it a little easier. Oh, she's got it. Yeah, but you could do it without a text box. You could change the layout to, yeah, well, that's fine. That works. Okay, you're going to be our typist. Have you all come up with the definitions for happiness or how you would describe happiness? How would you describe it?
Satisfaction.
Satisfaction.
Gratitude.
Gratitude. Somebody over here? Joy. Got 3 joys. What am I going next to? That.
You have 2 microphones, so take
Well-
sure you hold that one to that one.
Well, but it was when I walked over there. I don't know. Okay. All right. Over here, some contentment. Anybody with a longer definition of happiness? Yes.
Like an ongoing sense of peacefulness.
An ongoing sense of peacefulness. Some more.
Sense of fulfillment.
Fulfillment. Freedom. It's getting too close to the speaker, I think, that does it. Okay. Okay, somebody in the back here.
Being with friends and family.
Being with friends and family.
Smiling often.
Smiling often. Yeah.
Absence of problems and stress.
The absence of problems and stress. Okay, a few more. Let's hear it.
Purpose.
Purpose. Yeah. Overlooking the negative. Yeah. Okay.
Laughing.
Laughing. Good. I was wondering if that one was going to come up.
Cheerfulness.
Cheerfulness. Yeah. Connectedness with others. Okay, I think we've got enough now. What I want you to do is now in pairs, look at those words, and I want you to try to start grouping them. So figure out which ones are maybe a little bit similar in how they're worded, if one might be more of a synonym, or if there might be a range within those words. So take a couple of minutes and talk about those words, okay? So what have you come up with? All right, let's hear it.
So Serena and I put them into 4 groups.
Okay.
We're able to do like 4 themes.
I'm going to repeat it so because they're recording it. So 4 groups.
Yes. We separated them into 4. Hi guys. So Serena and I took all of the words and we separated them into 4 themes of things that we thought were similar. So for example, satisfaction and fulfillment, contentment, these were things that all meant similar things to us. Thank you.
All right. And that was great, but I'm going to correct her on one thing. She called them themes, and we don't have themes yet. She was developing some categories. Okay, so what else do we have?
That's feedback. We got feedback. We had more than 4. We had 6. I mean, we had some like gratitude just alone. But we put like freedom, we were loosely put with absence of problems. So we had some difficulty. And we might have even had more than 6. We didn't finish. Right, Madeline? We weren't finished.
All right. So like we talked about, it's an iterative process, right? You go through and you come up with more, or you collapse some and you talk about it. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
So we just made 4 categories. We did ones with physical demonstration, like laughing and smiling, external factors, like being with friends and family, absence of problems, and connection with others. Then we did feelings, and we lumped satisfaction, gratitude, joy, contentment, peacefulness, fulfillment, freedom, purpose, and cheerfulness all together. And then we put overlooking the negative as a skill.
Okay. All right. So they've started down some interesting paths, but we also see now that people are using some similar coding, right? So if we all had you take time and do the coding, then when we got back together as a group, we could start to look at similar codes that people were developing. And that might be one way that we choose those as maybe the primary ones, and then we could put the orphan ones there and say, all right, are these separate? Are they different? What should we do with these? So you see how the process starts to work. Another example about something people did. Don't be afraid of the microphone. Yeah.
So our first grouping was joy, cheerfulness, laughing, and smiling. Our second was peace, contentment, fulfillment, satisfaction, absence of problems and stress, and freedom. Third was feelings of connectedness with others, being with friends and family. The fourth was gratitude.
Did other people have gratitude as one? So, yeah, and would you put gratitude and contentment together? No, maybe, maybe not. I don't know. And there's definitely the sort of absence or overlooking the negative and the absence of problems and the more positive things. And I think somebody talked about the physical reactions. And there might be other physical reactions. Sometimes people talk about a feeling of warmth or, you know, so there might be sensory feelings that you talk about in relation to happiness. And then there might be other kinds of signs of happiness. So physical sensory feelings, the warmth, or the laughing, which is a motor response. So you can figure out different ways of looking at that. So questions about this exercise? Yeah.
It seems so subjective to me, but when you had your external audit done, the other professionals tend to agree.
Uh-huh. Well, so you can rely, if I had been with a team rather than doing my doctoral dissertation, I did have my dissertation committee that I could talk with about it, and actually other professionals that I could talk with it. When I was developing the questions that I was going to ask, I actually contacted PT, OT, and nursing faculty from across the country to review my questions and help me make sure that they were good questions and that I was asking them in the right way to elicit the content that I wanted. And then as I'm analyzing it, I can't remember if I mentioned this, I did send the interviews back to people after I had transcribed them to say, did you remember anything after we talked? Or now that you've read your comments, would you like to change anything? Because often when you're doing interviews with people, you can change their thinking by doing the interview with them, right? So I wanted to make sure I had captured what they were saying and it was right. And then as I started analyzing their words, that's why I sent it back to them. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't interpreting their words in ways that they didn't intend to use them. The other thing that I participated in one time, I was part of a research council at a hospital, and the nurses who were the primary people on the council had done a qualitative research collecting information about nurses' feelings about autonomy. And we spent, as a group, several weeks looking at the data, categorizing it in small groups, coming back together in big groups, revising the words we were using, going back and thinking about it again, and coming back together. So you try to look at it from as many different angles as you can and develop the right kinds of themes or messages that are there in your data. You're not developing the messages, you're discovering, I guess is a better word, what exists in the data. Okay, so any other questions? So this is going to be your chance to do some bracketing and coding. So these are actual words from one of my participants. So I want you to read this first and bracket things that you think are important and write codes on them. And then we're going to discuss what codes people came up with. So you're going to do this part individually. So has everyone now stopped or finished reading and done some highlighting or bracketing and started writing codes? So if you've read it, go ahead and start writing some codes by some of the things that you've bracketed or highlighted. Let's start with this side of the room first. Let's have a couple of codes from over here, things that people found interesting. Mentorship. We've got mentorship, okay. Perseverance and self-determination. Okay, good. So give us an example of mentorship.
She was seeking mentorship. She became a mentor herself.
Okay, she was seeking mentorship and then she felt like it was important to become a mentor herself. So from both directions, yeah, both receiving and giving. All right, so and yours was perseveration.
Perseverance.
Perseverance.
Self-determination.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
started talking about, going back to school and being a mother, but doing things on her own time when she wasn't interacting with her baby, and then having to do work outside of school was a new thing, and then constantly seeking feedback about her
Okay.
work.
Yeah, so perseverance, and that story of crying while she was driving down to school, leaving her newborn baby, is certainly an important story for showing that or demonstrating that. Did anybody over here have codes that were similar? So did you use the same words or did you use different words to describe it? Okay, so separating the two, deciding, yeah.
And also for professional development, I kind of had some categories like managing supervision, and time.
Okay, so for the managing part of it, there was a supervision piece, but there was also having time to do things. Okay. What else did you come up with? Yeah.
The persevering thing, I kind of separated it into things that were barriers, things that were supports for her going back to OT school. So talking about how she said she was lucky that her child was a good napper, so that was a support, whether it was constructed or not. And a barrier, she left the baby and she didn't want to do that.
Uh-huh.
And a barrier, it's challenging. If you're giving a lecture, it's challenging that you're not given time to do your preparation work. But a support that they did give her the time to actually go to the lecture.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. So you can have both barriers and supports under the same category. And the same is true. I didn't give you this example, but one of the participants in terms of talking about family, and I remember from the rest of her interview, she had a very supportive husband who was also helping her. There was another participant who said she didn't even tell her husband when she got awards at work or recognition at work because he wasn't supportive of what she was doing. And then her comment was, "That's why he's not my husband anymore." So you can see where family can also go both directions too. So persevering in the face of family lack of support, as well as being able to do more possibly because you did have support. And the same participant also said, I was interviewing her after she had 2 kids, and she said, I'm not sure I could have done those same things now. And that's the other thing when you're looking at the data, it was a point in time for me, and she was looking back at what she'd been able to do. Now, I would argue she's also still very active in professional organizations, and she's a mentor and doing other things. So she is continuing, but maybe in a different way. Other codes that or categories that we came up with. Yeah.
I chose one called professional qualities, especially when she was talking about her first mentor. She said that she was open and non-threatening, offered her help, was patient, and continued to seek education.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this is important for all of you to realize as you're going out on your field work and into your work practice. A mentor is not necessarily somebody at work. You may work in an environment where people aren't good mentors, and you can seek mentors from other settings. It's someone that you have a personal connection with. And she was lucky in that at her first job, she had a personal connection with that person. And so maybe that's another theme, is sort of the personal connection, or the, what they get from other people. That might be another category, the positive reinforcement, whether it's family or mentor or a boss. It might be that perceived support that's the code or the category. Okay, other codes that people came up with? Yeah.
I don't know if we already said this, but like a change in expectation over time. And like she said, the length of stay has become shorter and shorter. The workplace support for her going out and doing lectures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a change over time. And you could go different ways with categorizing that. That could be lifelong learning. That could be perceived as a barrier in the workplace environment. So you could go different directions with that. Yeah.
Her response to challenges. I noted that she wasn't given the same amount of time to prepare for presentations, but she was still doing presentations anyway.
Yeah.
And she also had a job that wasn't providing support, so she left.
Yeah. So then you might code that into, she's talking about she had less support for doing the presentations, but she had personal drive. So you might want to categorize that under values, that she felt that it was important to give back to and mentor other people as she had been mentored, and that was a value for her. So you see how you can start to look for commonalities or differences, and how it is, again, an iterative process, and you gradually narrow those down to the ones that you think best fit the data that you have. Okay, well, thank you all. I'll be here for a few more minutes if you have questions, but it looks like people are trying to get to class, so I'll let you go. All right?